the holiday season is quickly approaching, and so to prepare for Thanksgiving, I always like to think ahead, especially when it comes to things that I can make and freeze. And so this week, we are in the kitchen making up a couple of pumpkin rolls and a couple of pumpkin chocolate chip and pecan breads to put in the freezer and have them ready for Thanksgiving. Thank you all so much for being patient with me as I work out all of the kinks with the blog. I have already posted this pumpkin roll recipe to the blog, and so you can go there. I will link it in the description below. And if you want to stay updated with all of the recipes, I plan to send out a weekly newsletter. And if you subscribe to the email, it should also send you an email every time a recipe is posted. Let me know in the comments below if you're having any issues with subscribing at all to the blog. But like I said, the blog is www.thebluegrassfamily.com, and I will link both recipes, the recipe to this pumpkin roll, and also the recipe for the pumpkin bread. Pumpkin roll is made from scratch, and it's super simple. If you have all-purpose flour, baking powder, baking soda, salt, and a few spices on hand, you can throw it together pretty quickly. This time of year, especially with it being fall and the holiday season approaching, I try to keep on hand plenty of flour, plenty of baking spices, pumpkin pie spice, nutmeg, cloves, cinnamon, all of those things, plenty of sugar and butter, because a lot of the recipes that I'm making during this time of year call for those specific spices, and then also call for sugar, eggs, and butter, and cream cheese as well. That's another really great thing to keep on hand this time of year. I plan to try to get a good fall pantry list together for you all so I can post that to the blog, because I pretty much have in mind what I use whenever I'm baking this time of year, and so I think it would be really helpful and beneficial for you all to have a list of things that, if you keep on hand, you can make a lot of different desserts. Pumpkin rolls were a big staple for our family Thanksgiving gatherings, and my mom always hosts a big, huge family Thanksgiving holiday, and we all come together and celebrate as a family. And having pumpkin roll was always on the list of desserts because my whole entire family loves it. And so if there wasn't a pumpkin roll involved, everyone was highly disappointed. And my mom or my aunt used to always make the pumpkin roll desserts, and I've been the one to make the pumpkin roll the last few years, and so I love to have these in my freezer because it seems like this time of year where there are so many different gatherings going on and different potlucks, that it's just great to have these in the freezer for on a whim that we have somewhere to go and I need to bring something along. And they freeze so well and thaw so well, and they're so delicious that they're just a really great dessert to have this time of year during the fall season, to have in your freezer and to have on hand. I know that pumpkin roll can seem a little bit daunting at first if you have never made it before, because you have to get your jelly roll cakes made just perfectly, and they need to be even and they need to be smooth. And so the key for me to getting a perfectly baked pumpkin roll is to grease my jelly roll pans with a little olive oil, and then lay down some parchment paper, make sure that is nice and stuck to the jelly roll pan, and then take my olive oil and go back over the parchment paper again. And then I can spread my mixture my pumpkin cake mixture evenly out into the pans, and what I use is an icing spatula, and I just make sure that it's nice and even so that when it goes into the oven it bakes perfectly, so that whenever I go to flip it, it's not breaking and cracking and all of those things. So that is my tip for making pumpkin roll. I really think that baking them at 350 for I start checking mine at 7 minutes, between 7 and 11 minutes, to make sure that they're not burning, because they do not take long at all to bake. But having the parchment paper down on the jelly roll pan also makes it a lot easier whenever you go to flip your pumpkin cake out onto your dusted tea towel that's been dusted with confectioner's sugar. It just makes that process a lot easier. I recently had a conversation with another lady about baking, and we were talking about it, and I know that everyone has their own interests and their own hobbies and things like that, but to me baking is just so soothing, and just even watching this little clip, it's just so soothing to me. Whenever I get in the kitchen and start using my hands and I get into this kind of rhythm of baking, and I could just stay in there all day and listen to music and bake, and I really enjoy it. Now, I don't enjoy having to wash all of the dishes and do all of the cleanup afterwards as much, but I definitely enjoy the process of just creating something, cooking from scratch and creating a wonderful dessert that I know that I'm going to enjoy and that my family is going to enjoy as well. My aunt actually owns a bakery here in the town where we live, and I used to make the pumpkin rolls for her bakery, and I would make about 20 of them at a time. And pumpkin rolls are definitely a labor of love, but you would be surprised how fast that they go whenever you have a little bit of a system in place. So if you're planning on making quite a few of these and freezing them, 1 can, which is 15 ounces of pumpkin puree, can make about 3 pumpkin rolls. So because they're so thin, the cakes are just the thin jelly roll style, you can get quite a bit out of just 1 can. And so with just a little bit of ingredients, you can actually make quite a bit of these. And so if you can plan ahead a little bit and just have the workspace ready for baking quite a bit up, then you can make it go fairly quickly. I believe my most favorite part of the pumpkin roll is definitely this delicious, sweet, creamy cream cheese filling. I don't think that you can beat this. I don't know. It's just my most favorite icing. And whenever you have chilled your pumpkin roll in the refrigerator for a few hours and you're ready to serve it, there's just nothing like having a slice of pumpkin roll with this delicious, cool cream cheese icing in the center. It just makes it so flavorful, and I think that's kind of what makes pumpkin roll very unique, is that it's served cold and it has this delicious filling along with it. Pumpkin roll can be a little bit time sensitive, as far as it can take a little bit of time to allow the jelly roll pumpkin cake to cool, and then to mix up your icing and get that taken care of. So I find that just transferring the pumpkin roll over to a piece of parchment paper and adding a little confectioner's sugar to that makes it easier whenever I go to freeze my pumpkin roll. I go ahead and add the filling in, and then once I've done that, I can roll it up in the parchment paper and then wrap it in plastic wrap, and to me it just freezes better that way. So that is the reason that I go ahead and transfer it over to the parchment paper. The pumpkin roll recipe and the pumpkin bread recipe are actually very similar. For the dry ingredients, you're using the same materials or ingredients. So for the dry ingredients for the pumpkin roll, you're using all-purpose flour, baking powder, baking soda, salt, and the same spices. So all of that is very similar. The only difference is that you're going to be using more flour in the pumpkin bread than you are in the pumpkin roll cake. So if you're going to be making these at the same time, it actually is a lot easier because you should have, or if you're planning it, you can plan to just get a little bit more of the ingredients that you need, and you should have it all on hand to be able to make both of these. I'm actually really bad at remembering recipes, and so I decided a long time ago that I would get my composition notebook and I would write down all of my most favorite and most used recipes as I go in the composition book, just to make it easier for me, because I tend to make the same things over and over again, and you would think that I would have it all memorized, but I don't. I know that there are people like my great grandma. I think she could cook anything and not have to use a recipe or take notes or anything like that, but that's just the way that I am. I'm a planner and a note taker, and I like to write things down, and I think it just helps me to visualize and to see the steps in order. And so that's why I really love to make the recipes for y'all and put them on the blog so that you can easily print them off and put them in a binder or write them down in your notebook so that you can have them on hand, because I still glance over at my notebook all the time just to make sure I'm adding the correct ingredients. And when it comes to baking, it actually is really important to follow a step-by-step recipe in order to get the exact thing that you want, because if you're not following the recipe, then you can very likely mess it up, and you don't want to waste all of your time, efforts, and energy, and all of your ingredients that are so expensive these days. So the blog makes it a lot easier for you to actually be able to follow the recipe. I really love how easy it is to mix up any kind of dessert bread, whether it be banana bread or this pumpkin bread. It just seems like that making bread like this is a very, very simple and easy dessert to make. It doesn't take very long, uses very simple ingredients, and like I said, it freezes really well. And the main thing to remember whenever making bread is just that you need to mix your dry ingredients and your wet ingredients separately, and then add in your dry ingredients slowly to your wet ingredients and kind of incorporate that a little at a time until you have a really good batter that you can pour into your loaf pans and bake. And so that's what I'm doing here, and just making sure that I had the right consistency for the pumpkin bread. One tip that I do like to state is that greasing your pans, whether that be with butter or Crisco or olive oil, and then adding a little bit of flour in there, makes a world of difference when it comes to your breads just popping right out of their loaf pans and not crumbling and falling apart on you. So I'm bad about not doing this step because it takes a little bit longer, but I can promise you that it is worth it not to have your breads falling apart. Not everyone agrees on adding in chocolate chips and pecans into their pumpkin bread, but for me, I just think that these added ingredients make such a huge difference in the texture and flavor, and there's just something about having a little bit of pumpkin and pecan together that makes me feel like it's actually the fall season, and so I love to add chocolate chips and pecans into my pumpkin bread. This pumpkin bread actually bakes at 325 degrees for about 65 minutes. And so I have two similar sized loaf pans. One is just a little bit smaller than the other, and I baked them both together in my oven, and it took exactly 65 minutes. Pretty much as soon as my timer went off, I stuck a butter knife in them and pulled it out, and they were both perfectly done. I love to have a really moist, delicious pumpkin bread, and so I like mine to be a little bit on the soft side. I don't like an overly done bread. I just think it tastes better when it's a little bit softer on the inside, but I feel like that these turned out really good, and I went ahead and popped them out onto my cooling rack so that they could cool down a little bit, and I couldn't wait. I was a little impatient about cutting them, so I went ahead and sliced off a few pieces, and the kids were ready to try it, and my sweet cousin came over, and I was able to actually give her a loaf of it and a piece of it before she left, and so I was really happy to get to share it, and they all really enjoyed it and loved it. And that's what's beautiful about cooking and baking, is that when you have things like this on hand and you want to share it, and I always do, I always love sharing my food with other people. It just brings a smile to my heart and my face to see them and try and enjoy my food, but that's the perk of baking and cooking a lot, and so it was really exciting. So thank you all. I hope you enjoy these recipes. Have a wonderful week.